to do. So let me see if I can get this going. So when did I decide to be a lawyer? I actually had a conversation with my dad when I was a sophomore in high school. So around the age that many of you are now. And one of the things he'd asked me about was like, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I really didn't have a good answer for that. I didn't actually know any lawyers. I knew that my dad worked with a lot of lawyers. And so I kind of, more than anything else, was crossing out things. So, well, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, hey, I think law is interesting. Maybe I want to do that. And so he's like, all right, cool. All right. And then I kind of forgot about the conversation. And sometime later, he actually showed up with 3 books. He actually had a book of lawyer jokes. Everybody likes to make fun of lawyers. And so if you can't take the jokes about the profession, you shouldn't go into it. And the other 2 were these books, Art of Cross-Examination and Art of Questioning. And both of these books were really kind of about the day-to-day parts of doing a job as a lawyer. And the really cool part about it is I still have those books. I don't really read through them, but they're great little vignettes and stories about things that actually happen in court. And I started reading these books, and they were just fun. And so I got hooked. And that was kind of the first step along the journey to becoming a lawyer. And everything that I kind of at that point started looking at and experiencing really kind of added to that desire of, hey, this is going to be fun. I'm really going to get a kick out of becoming a lawyer. So for anybody, what's that first step? Well, you got to go to some place called law school. And it's, shown in film and television, and, there's different stories and whatever about it. But I think that line down there where it says doing your best is never good enough, that's probably true. Usually by the time you get to law school, the kids that are there are working really, really hard. You never quite feel like you're completely measuring up to everybody. And the professors are really smart. And so you're constantly feeling like you're challenged. One of the things I loved about law school, it was the one place from a schooling standpoint where I felt like I met some of the most interesting people in my life. And I met some of the most interesting professors, and we were always getting challenged no matter what it was that we were studying. And you always had these amazing conversations that happen inside the classroom and outside. And so just from an academic standpoint, law school is the best experience that I ever had as a student. So what do you need to do to get into law school? Well, first off, you need to have a bachelor's degree. So that's going to a 4-year university or going to, you can go to a JC or someplace, get a 2-year degree and go and make sure you get your bachelor's at somewhere else. Now, there's really not a particular major you need to have in order to get into law school. Quite frankly, I had classmates that had studied in the sciences or computer science that came into law, and it didn't hold them back or didn't affect them at all. But it's not uncommon for people when they do go and get a law degree to major in political science, psychology, criminal justice, history, economics, philosophy, arts and humanities, sociology. It really runs the gamut in terms of people that come into law school with what their background and degree is. And so when you get to college, don't really worry about it. Like, find something that you're really interested in and study whatever that is, and then apply to law school. So one of the things you need to do is you need to take the LSAT. Now, there are some law schools that also accept the GRE. So for those people that are looking at graduate programs and aren't entirely sure what you want to do, you can take the GRE and then kind of have some of those choices. But most schools at this point are still taking the LSAT. It's a multiple choice exam, and it's broken into 3 sections. There's a logical reasoning, an analytical reasoning, a reading comprehension. There are LSAT prep classes, no different than for an SAT or an ACT type of a thing. And it's scored on a scale between 120 and 180. Your average score usually lands in about the 150 range. That's kind of, where you're going to try to shoot for. If you want to get in a more prestigious law school, you do obviously want to get higher scores, but that's one piece of it. And then obviously applying to any law school, you're going to have an application you're going to need to do. You're going to need to, get letters of recommendation. So obviously you want to pay attention when you're in college that you have good professors that you have a good connection with. You're going to write a personal statement so they know something about you, and obviously you're going to need to turn in your college transcripts so they have an idea academically how well you're going to do. Now, I'm going to talk about California law schools, a lot of law schools nationwide, but let's just talk about California law schools. And there are what we call ABA accredited, which are accredited by the American Bar Association. And then there's what are a subset of law schools that are just accredited by the state of California. So the ABA accredited ones are nationally known, and you're going to be able to take this degree and go into other states and be able to turn that into a law degree, which I'll get to in a little bit. But these are your ABA accredited law schools. And as you can see, just breaking up into Southern California and Northern California, there are a lot of options available for you. The ones that I've highlighted for Southern California are the ones that are here in Orange County. So you have Chapman, you have UCI, and you have Western State. And so all of these are wonderful law schools for you to be able to attend. And as you can see, you've got really prestigious law schools in the state of California, whether it's at Berkeley or at Stanford, you got UCLA, you got USC that are here. But like I said, there's a lot of different law schools that really make up a really great legal community here in California. So there's also these other law schools that are known as California accredited law schools. And so they don't have the same credentialing as the ABA accredited. And so while you can get a law degree here, and as long as you're practicing in the state of California, that won't be a problem. This is only a problem if you're planning on going to another state to practice. Some other states may not necessarily recognize some of the law degrees in some of these other states when it comes to licensing, which is passing the bar exam and whatever. So again, a lot of other law schools up and down the state. I have a friend of mine that actually graduated from Trinity Law School a couple of years ago. And so she's practicing law in the state of California, but that's kind of what she wanted to do, was to practice law here anyways. She wasn't planning on going out of state. And so it really was going someplace that really kind of fit in with what she was doing and living in Orange County on the rest of it. So again, a lot of different opportunities for you, regardless of kind of where you are academically as well. Like, you know, you can be the best student in the world and get into some of the top-notch law schools, or you can choose not to do that. And then the great thing about it is when you're looking at law schools, really focus on what it is that you want to do when you get to law school. What's your end objective? And if you're going to go into prosecution, or you're going to go into criminal defense law, or anything like that, where you go to school is not necessarily as important. It doesn't necessarily matter that you went to a top-notch law school. It's really about what that particular law school is good at training you for. And so, for example, I'll go back a slide. When it comes to, for example, Chapman produces a lot of the lawyers that actually practice criminal law here in Orange County. So they're very prestigious in that respect, in that they make up a large portion of the legal community here in Orange County. So exams are a huge part of this in terms of getting your license at the end of the day, because you go to law school, if you want to become a lawyer, you still have to take a bar exam and get licensed by the state of California as a lawyer. So there is a series of standardized exams that you have to take. Now, the first is known as the baby bar, and it only applies for those California accredited law schools where you have to take this test. It's a one-day exam where you have 100 multiple choice questions and you have 4 essays that you need to complete. If you go to any of the ABA accredited law schools, you don't have to take this. But in order to get your license when you graduate law school, you need to take 2 other exams. One is the MPRE, which is basically an ethics test that you have to take. And it's 2 hours long. You're just sitting down one time and going through a bunch of the questions. And your goal here is to make sure that, you know, you're doing things above board, that you're following the rules, you're being ethical towards your client, you're being ethical towards judicial system. And then the big one is the bar exam. Now, the good thing is for you guys, the bar exam back in the day when I took it was 3 days long. And now it's 2 days long. So you've already blocked off one whole day. The bar exam is offered twice a year in California, in February and July. But because a portion of the test, the day 2 portion of it, which is the multi-bar exam, is administered nationwide. So everybody across the entire country is taking the same 200 questions. And so that's why all of the bar exams are all scheduled around the same time, is because they don't want anybody cheating. They want everybody taking the exam at the same time. Now, day 1 is 5 different essays. Each one of the essays is about an hour long, and a 90-minute performance test. So basically you get these blocks of time where you basically sit there and you write these essays. And it takes, you know, you have the morning session up until lunch, and then you have the afternoon session, and that's pretty much it. It is pass, not pass. Nobody cares how well you did on the bar exam, because quite frankly, they don't tell you your scores. The only time they tell you your scores is if you don't pass the exam, and they tell you how close you were. So you have an idea of, you know, what you might need to do to get your score high enough so that you can pass the bar exam the second time around. So that's basically what the bar exam's about. So why did I become a prosecutor? Well, during that time period coming up in the, you know, late 80s, early 90s, when I was in high school, you know, a lot of the stuff that we were, you know, we had was just, you know, TV and news and whatnot. So like I said, I didn't know any lawyers. And so a lot of that information about lawyering came from media. came from TV. And that's where I got a lot of my influences. These days with social media, you're going to get a lot more access to things. And as I'll show you in a little bit, technology these days allows you an access to the courthouse that I never had as a student, unless I took the time to get in my car or get on a bus and go to court. And so during that time period, the things that I saw on television were prosecution of mob bosses in New York. So John Gotti over here in the black and white photo. The other major trial during that time period was the People versus O.J. Simpson. And there was, a show that was on a couple years ago about this particular thing. But my law school, when the O.J. Simpson trial was happening, was my first year in law school. And we had a student lounge, and there was a big TV that was set up in the student lounge. And during every break, people would be hanging out in the student lounge watching the trial. And the entire trial was broadcast. And it was really the first opportunity to see all of these lawyers, all of these experts, all of these great defense attorneys in front of the public day after day. And my law school professors were well known enough that they were oftentimes on TV at the end of the day when people were saying, hey, we need some commentary about today's proceedings. And I would see my professor up there and he'd be talking about this particular trial or what they did right or what they did wrong. And so it was a master class in learning how to and how not to prosecute cases. And that was inspiring in a lot of ways of, hey, this is the type of work I really want to be involved in. I want to be in this fight. I want to be involved in these issues. And it was just a great time. And then in terms of just film and television, you had these great movies that came out during that time period. On the left, you've got Law and Order, which continues to this day, but you had the old cast that was there, and they really showed you what it meant to be a really powerful advocate in the courtroom. You had such great movies, such as the ones that are there with My Cousin Vinny on the bottom, or A Few Good Men. I mean, those highlighted defense attorneys, but you could also see the prosecutors in those cases. They did their job well. They were not people that were slimy or corrupt or whatever. They did their job. And even at the end with My Cousin Vinny, the prosecutor making the correct decision, which is, in light of everything that's happened, I'm going to dismiss this case. I'm going to stand up and say, you're right. I'm going to dismiss this case and doing the right thing. So really great, inspiring people that kind of put me in this path of wanting to be an advocate in court and to be an advocate for the people. Just even today now, I mean, in terms of your influences, you can look at prosecutors that have roles of national prominence. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor was an assistant district attorney for the Manhattan DA's office many years ago. Kamala Harris started off as a prosecutor in the San Francisco DA's office. She eventually became the DA of San Francisco a couple of years after I graduated from law school. She eventually became the elected attorney general and then became a state senator. And as you know, she's going to become or is going to be our next vice president. So prosecutors have an important role in society, and they go on to do a lot of different things, oftentimes in the name of public service, because this is basically what we're trained to do, is to serve the public and to do justice. Here's one of the things that the United States Supreme Court said in terms of defining what it is a prosecutor's responsibilities are. A prosecutor is the representative not of an ordinary party, like, there's people that file lawsuits all the time, but we represent the sovereign, right? But of sovereignty, whose obligation to govern impartially is as compelling as its obligation to govern at all, and whose interest, therefore, in criminal prosecution is not that it shall win a case, but that justice shall be done. And there's not very many jobs out there where literally every day you go to work and your responsibility is to do justice. And when you go home at night, you want to ask yourself, have I done justice today? Have what I done today been in the interest of justice? As such, he is a peculiar and very definite sense the servant of the law, the twofold aim of which, as the guilt shall not escape, nor innocence suffer. He may prosecute with earnestness and vigor. Indeed, he should do so. But while he may strike hard blows, he is not at liberty to strike foul ones. It is as much his duty to refrain from improper methods calculated to produce a wrongful conviction as it is to use every legitimate means to bring about a just one. And so those are the basic, tenets that prosecutors live by, right? We're allowed to fight hard, but we have to fight fair. And that's not the rule for everybody else. It's not the rule for the defense bar. Their job is to represent their client. It's not how civil lawyers work. their duties is, again, to their individual client, whoever that may be. But for prosecutors, we serve everybody. I mean, the reality of it is the defendant is also a citizen or a person that's in the state that, in fact, is represented by me. And so it's important that I do my job in the interest of fairness and justice. And as you all can see from everything that's happened this past year, it's important that we maintain that as prosecutors, because everybody sees how we behave, and the criminal justice system is only as successful as it is believed to be successful or is believed to be fair. And so it's important that as the servants of justice that we go about our job in that particular way. So I've hoped that during the course of my career that I have served justice, and the vast majority of my cases that I handle, there's no limelight to it. They don't end up in the headlines, but on occasion, some of my cases do end up in the headlines. And so here are some of them, but it really kind of shows you the gamut of cases that I've handled. I've handled gang members that have committed murder. I've handled domestic violence and family violence cases. There was a case involving a father who threw his son in Newport Harbor while on a cruise in the harbor, and people were appalled by that. I've prosecuted law enforcement. There's the sheriff's deputy that was arrested for domestic violence and charged with domestic violence and for threatening his wife. There was another police officer I prosecuted who raped not only his girlfriend, but also his former wife, also committed domestic violence against them. Other domestic violence cases I've handled all kinds of random things. There was a party bus a couple of years ago that they just kind of emptied out of the party bus and went into a 7-Eleven and looted that 7-Eleven. And so there are a lot of cases, like I said, that don't see the headlines because this is not really what it's about, but it gives you an idea of the types of things that as prosecutors we handle. It's a wide range of cases. And one of the things that I love about my job is this is where I get to work. It's a little bit odd in a pandemic. So I do have colleagues, like this is a defense attorney I know, Bobby, that was the first day we reopened courts, and he, well, went a little bit far with the mask, but we were at a point where we weren't quite sure what was going on with the pandemic. But in non-pandemic times, you'll see on the photograph on the right, that's the environment we work in. We deal with citizens on a regular basis. And this is a situation where you have just people coming in for jury duty. We deal with everyday citizens, and we're sitting there and trying to figure out, hey, you get to participate in the process as well, and we're trying to pick jurors to participate in a criminal case. And the judge on the left is someone who I admire very much. He's one of our most experienced and brightest judges in the courthouse. But it's also the opportunity to work with really smart people that are trying to do justice as well every day. And so it's a fantastic environment to work in. So where can you get more information? How do you get started, especially if you pursue this particular route? One of the books that I was also directed to was a book called Rough Justice. And it was a guy who was a DA in the Manhattan DA's office, where I showed you earlier Sonia Sotomayor worked. And in his first 3 years, he was a DA there, and he wrote about his experiences. And there was a show way back in the 1980s called Night Court. And it was set up as a comedy, but it was set in Manhattan courthouse. And the way that things worked in New York was they actually had a night court. So people would show up at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and they would have their criminal case going on. And so you would work at night sometimes. And he talked about, how trials were done and the types of cases he prosecuted. And it really was like a day-to-day description of kind of the challenges of being a young DA. And so it was really enthralling. And I actually ended up applying to the Manhattan DA's office. I didn't get hired by them, but it was the type of thing where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally cool. I really want to check this out. Doing Justice is a book that Preet Bharara wrote not too long ago. He was a AUSA, which is an assistant U.S. attorney. So you work on the federal prosecution level. He had a very extensive career, and this is a very recent book. So it gives you an idea in terms of the types of things that are happening now, and then gives you an idea of what happens on the federal system. So other places you can go for information, the State Bar of California tells you all the stuff you need to know about how to pass the bar exam, disciplinary types of stuff. For prosecutors, CDAA, which is the association that represents the DAs statewide, they have a lot of great resources, and they can give you a lot of information about kind of the types of things that prosecutors do. Our own Orange County District Attorney's Office, which is where I work, gives you an idea of what happens here locally, what kinds of cases we're prosecuting, stuff that makes the headlines and whatnot. And then the last thing, so one of the things during the pandemic is that the Orange County Superior Court has had to figure out, how do we give the public access? Because the way the court system works is any member of the public can go to a courthouse, walk into a courtroom and see, hey, what's going on in this particular courtroom? Let me find out what's happening. And with COVID, we had to close access to the courthouse, to the public, right? We were really trying to limit the number of people that were coming and going into the courthouse. We couldn't just really have people hanging out in the audience all the time, but we wanted to make sure that people still had access to the courts. And so what the court decided to do was they were going to broadcast, live stream every court proceeding to the public. And so you can go to YouTube and you can go check this out. So let's do that right now. I am going to see if I can get this to work. Give me 1 second here. Okay.
Yes, please.
All right, body worn camera protective order will be ordered issued.
So can you guys see that?
Hey, Miss Shug, we may not have one, so when you're gathering.
Hopefully that's working on the screen share. If you can, that is a judge sitting in his courtroom right now who is calling cases that are being heard in the Orange County Superior Court. And so you're getting a live look in terms of what's happening right now as he's calling cases. Now, the judges set up their cameras however they want. Some of them have them facing them. Some of them have them facing the audience and the attorneys or the defendants or the audience or whatever. But you can kind of follow along literally everything that's happening. This is what we call a calendar court. So there's just a stack of cases, a bunch of cases that he's calling and handling right now. And there are other courtrooms that are doing trials. And so you can get a live look into that. There's not a lot of trials that are happening during COVID, but we've actually done about 200 trials in the Orange County court system during this time period. And so that's kind of what's going on.
Okay.
So I'll give you a second to listen in.
All right. On the Rivera matter, defendants not present, good cause exists to continue the case. Understanding that Ms. Sikanova has not had an opportunity to confer with the client, I'm going to set the case within statutory time, which is January 22nd, 2021. Order the defendant to be present on that date, whatever the terms of bail are, to remain. There's also misdemeanor with a general time waiver that's previously been entered, and a probation violation, which I'm going to trail to that same day as well. There's also an open.
All right, so for that, basically what you're doing is you can go to the Orange County Court website. Oops, let me get back to this. Yeah, so if you're interested in that, you go to the occourts.org website and then look for a link for courtroom live streaming. Now, there are certain courtrooms that you're more likely to find something interesting. So W9, W12 are the ones over in West Court that have stuff going on. In fact, I'm looking right now and W12 is just getting back in session. If you want to try and find a trial, the courtrooms you're looking at are basically between, they're in the Central Justice Center. You're looking kind of in the area of about C30 through C45. So look for, just kind of bounce around, see if there's anything going on in any of those courtrooms. Those are your felony courtrooms, and the trials that happen in there really run the gamut between homicides to, drug sales and that type of stuff. But fascinating way to kind of check out what's happening in your local courts. Some of the stuff is boring, but you never know. You might find something interesting. So what about classes you can take? I would say that anything that really puts you in a position to really, sharpen your skills as it relates to presentation, video production, photojournalism, visual media, that type of stuff. Anything that really kind of gets your creative skills going as it relates to presenting material. Because one of the things that we do as lawyers is to take complex pieces of material and really condense it in a way and present it in a way that's fascinating and interesting to our jurors. And the thing about it is our jurors are constantly changing, right? Like you know, if you're presenting to a group of folks like my parents, what they're interested in is going to be different than what my daughter is interested in listening to and watching. And so their attention span is different, and how you package it is different. And really your job is to figure out what works best, not only for them, but for you. What do you feel most comfortable presenting in? What's your style like? And oftentimes cases are really about stories and telling a story. And how do you figure out what's the heart of this particular story? What's that one message that's going to grab my jurors and get them to listen to my story and to convince them that what actually happened, you know, is consistent with the presentation that I'm offering and why it's consistent with the law. And so a lot of those skills are really good in sharpening, you know, your presentation and thinking about some of these things as you're going along. I threw up entrepreneurship mainly because, you know, oftentimes you're working by yourself and you want to be able to present things and organize things and have some of those skills. And obviously, if you are going to go into criminal law, so having some idea what, you know, CSI is involved and how some of those pieces fit together is a great way of kind of getting that, getting your feet wet in that particular area. And so as I kind of leave you, these are kind of my final thoughts. You know, some of them are funny, obviously, but, you know, on the left, it's really about how do you convince people? And the one thing that I've learned in doing this job is there's no one person that is the ideal prosecutor. We come in all sizes, shapes, and forms. And I don't care if you have, you know, you're an immigrant, you have an accent. You know, two of the best attorneys in the office. One is a guy that, you know, was a homicide prosecutor for years, but whenever he spoke to his jurors, he had a heavy accent, but they never really paid any attention to it because his story was so compelling. He as an advocate was so compelling that it didn't really matter. My best friend in the office, she's deaf, and she is the most phenomenal lawyer you would ever imagine. And she has been able to navigate this world. And so it really doesn't matter what your walk of life is. It doesn't really matter how good or how bad a student is. Are you somebody that a jury can trust? Are you somebody that a judge can trust? Or are you somebody who can tell a compelling story? Or are you somebody who works hard and has a sense of fairness and of justice? And as long as you have those capabilities and that capacity, you can definitely do this job as a prosecutor. And the last thing is that whole point, which is this is justice for all, right? Ultimately, what being a part of the criminal justice system is ensuring that justice takes place. And that is one of the best jobs that anybody could really have. And so one of the reasons why I'm really proud of the type of work that I get to do, because that's what I get to do. I get to try and pursue justice, and it's really kind of cool. So that's kind of it in terms of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, at this point, folks, you can go ahead and type them into the chat, and I'll go ahead and relay them to Mr. Yu. Actually, I'll start one out for you, Mr. Yu. When you mentioned the fact that anyone could become a lawyer, so I had a psych degree. How difficult is it for someone to go from, like, say they majored in political science to pursuing law, or someone coming from psychology to pursue law? Like, what's the catch up there?
I mean, the reality of what happens is, in terms of legal education, nobody really has a leg up. I mean, if you take a legal studies class or you have that type of some type of background that maybe has some connection, you might get a little bit of a leg up. But the reality of it is, what you're learning in law school is how to think like a lawyer. So it's really about having analytical skills and then applying it in various disciplines that the law offers. And so it's that skill set that really matters. And as long as you're able to hone that in whatever your area of study is, whether it's psychology or political science or history, it's really about developing your ability to analyze things and to think a particular way. One of the stories that one of my dad's legal friends told me a long time ago was, law school is basically this. They basically take your head off, they scramble around your brain, and they put the head back on. And that happens to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, from whatever background, discipline you are, they make you think in a completely different way. So I don't think there's really any advantage for anybody to come from any particular background. It really is a unique experience in and of itself. And so there isn't any specialized training that you can do that gives you a leg up in law school.
Very interesting. Thank you for that response. Okay, so we got a couple of questions from our students. How much would you say ethics plays a role in being a lawyer in comparison to the logical side of law?
It kind of depends on the type of law that you're doing. If you are doing criminal law, like or as a prosecutor, ethics plays a very, very prominent role in it. I was a civil litigator as well, so I've done criminal work before, and I can tell you that it really never comes into play in that. It's really about getting the job done for your client, and there really aren't any rules. But I would say that when it comes down to doing the right thing, you know, every day you're trying to do the right thing. Some of it stuff is you get used to, like, okay, this is just how things are done because this is the right way of doing it. So you don't think about it, but it is a huge part of what we do as prosecutors.
Thank you for that response. All right, we have another one. So in addition to the majors you listed, what are some common majors that aspiring lawyers take in college?
Besides the ones I listed, those are kind of the big ones, I would say, is, you know, political science, you know, psychology, sociology, history, English, you know, rhetoric. A lot of those softer science is what you typically will see, but that doesn't mean that you have to do that. And I would say, I would describe it to you this way. If it really kind of depends on the type of law you want to do afterwards. So I knew a couple guys that went through law school that were had computer science and engineering backgrounds. And why was that important? Well, because when they were done, they were going into that area. They were going into intellectual property, right? They were going to be in those areas where having that degree mattered for the people that were hiring them. And so ultimately, it was more important for them to have that type of an undergraduate degree so that when they got legal jobs at the end, when they were applying for these positions, and someone said, you know, what's this or that or whatever, and they're like, oh, I know what that is because I'm an engineer by trade. I know exactly what that is. So it really depends on the type of law that you're doing. But if you want to be a prosecutor or work in the criminal defense field, it really doesn't matter what the major was that you were studying.
Nice answer. Nice answer. Did you or do you know someone have any problem with public speaking in court? And if so, how did you get over it, or how did they, I guess, work on their public speaking?
Yeah, so I did a lot of public speaking when I was in school. You know, I took classes. My parents put me in classes. I did MUN when I was in high school. I was always involved in, you know, those types of things. When I got to college, I was very active in political leadership, and so it was very common for me to be out and about, you know, talking. So when it came to law school, I got kind of comfortable. It really wasn't that challenging for me to speak publicly, and part of it was just constantly doing it and doing it and doing it. I would say that as it relates to other lawyers that I have seen, everybody evolves over time. You kind of figure out things. And it's also like learning how to ride a bike or learning an instrument. When you first start off, it's really challenging. It's hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to come naturally. But you kind of learn some tricks along the way. And you can always get better at public speaking. But it was not uncommon for me to see early on young lawyers, you would have your entire, you know, closing argument written out. There's nothing wrong with that because you're standing up there at a podium arguing to the jury and you're reading. That's fine, right? They don't know any different oftentimes. And when you're asking questions of witnesses, that's something where people will write out a script. To this day, I still write out a script, but I oftentimes will set it aside because I know the case well enough and I know what kinds of questions I want to ask. And so a lot of that stuff you learn by doing it over and over and over and over and over again. I've done almost 100 jury trials in the time period that I've been a lawyer, but I've done probably maybe about 1,000 different hearings. And so when you're constantly in court every day of your life, you get used to talking to people. The other thing that makes it really easy is most of the time when you're talking to people you see on a daily basis. It's like going and talking to a teacher all of the time. And nobody cares if you say or you stutter or whatever. These are people that you see on a regular basis. You see the same judges, same defense attorneys all of the time. Oftentimes you see the same police officers. And so when you develop a rapport just talking to them, it doesn't really feel like anything other than a conversation. And so it's really not as challenging as you would think it would be, and it's not as scary. But to be clear, anytime I get up, that first moment I have in front of a new group of jurors and I'm, you know, going through and I spend some time picking them, I get the butterflies. Like we all kind of get nervous, our hands get sweaty. That's a normal reaction. And it kind of is a reminder of, okay, I'm alive. And the moment I get up and that first sentence comes out and I don't know, are they going to like me? Are they not going to like me? Am I going to say something funny? What if they say something funny and I don't react appropriately? You know, all of those things you think about. But once you're in it and you just go and things happen, and you just get used to it after time, so.
That was a great question that Susan had. So this next one, how do you deal with disappointment in cases or when the result is not what you'd hoped?
Well, you try not to lose your top. I've had a couple of moments where I've been really upset. And, as long as I've done the best that I can do, and a lot of times it's also communicating with your victims. I will tell you that one of the things that's important is, for me to set expectations with the victims ahead of time, especially on cases that I know are going to be tough, because I'll sit down and talk to them in advance. And I said, look, this jury is 12 people. They're 12 licensed drivers with, on average, maybe an 8th grade education. And they weren't there and they don't know you. And they're just simply making a decision based on the facts and evidence that's presented to them. They're not making a judgment call on who you are as an individual or what you went through. And it's their decision as to what they think happened. And it's important for that they understand that it's not a reflection on them. The fact that a jury finds the defendant not guilty doesn't mean that that victim wasn't traumatized. It just means that 12 people didn't necessarily see it that particular victim's way. And so that's something that I have to deal with, dealing with victims. Oftentimes I'm disappointed in the effort that I've made. I feel sometimes I've let people down when I don't get a conviction or I don't get the conviction for the counts that I thought that they were going to get convicted of. But at the same time, I also accept that that is the verdict. More often than not, I think jurors get it right. These are not necessarily easy cases, and we're asking them to do difficult things because the sides can't agree on it. Or somebody basically says, I have a right to trial and I'm exercising my right to trial. And it's your job, Mr. Prosecutor, to prove that I, in fact, did whatever you've accused me of doing. And so it's my responsibility to do that. And I've had cases where I thought, walking in, oh man, I'm going to lose this for sure. And I end up not, because the witnesses turn out to be much stronger than I thought they were. Or the jurors were able to see the case that I saw it when I thought, oh, this is going to be a mess. How am I going to be able to explain it to them? And there are hard cases where I'm like, ah, crap. And then I do get my butt handed to me and I'm like, okay, on to the next one. But there's always a next case. There's always another victim. You can't get too high. You can't get too low. And that's why I've been able to do this job for 20 some odd years, is because you're able to put those behind you and move on. Because at the end of the day, there's always another victim. There's always another crime. There's always something else that you need to work on. And it's important to really give your energy to each one of those cases and not be trying the last case that you tried. It's not, it's still important to lose. I'm sorry, it's still important to learn from those losses. And more often than not, that's what happens, is I learn, okay, don't do that next time. And so as you gain experience, you get to be a better lawyer by not making the same mistakes twice.
Okay. So I'll answer this next question. There were some activities we can do what are some activities we can do in high school? Sorry, the chat moved just now. See whether or not, interested in law. I was going to say take the administration of justice courses through ROP or the crime scene investigation ones. Those are great classes to dip your toes in. And then if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, go down to the courthouse. A lot of high schools that I see, take students down to the courthouse and they take a tour and they hang around the courthouse and kind of see what lawyers are doing. Talk to lawyers about stuff. One of the things that lawyers love to do is talk about themselves and talk about their work. So that's a great way of doing that. Mock trial is also a great opportunity. There's mock trial programs. I know some of the high schools in Irvine, you guys have your mock trial teams. That's a great introduction as well in terms of what exactly that type of work entails. Like I said before, you have the opportunity at least to kind of watch what's happening if you want to hop on YouTube. And so I think those are some great ways of getting at least an idea of law. Watch some television shows, read some books. I know some of that stuff is a little bit glamorized, but I would say that a show like the original Law and Order, which is very much kind of hashing out the day-to-day of what cops and lawyers do, is actually a very, very solid show. And so, yeah, those are all good things to kind of pay attention to.
Oh man, you're sparking a lot of questions now. All right, let's see if we can get through these. Let's see. So this student had more of a question of how much does it normally cost, like an average, to apply to law school around here?
To apply to law school?
Apply.
The application process, well, if you take exams and then the application fee, when you're paying for the paperwork to get that done, it's going to run you a couple $100, maybe $1,000. It's been a while since I've looked into the exact cost of that. Law school, however, is going to be a very scary proposition when it comes to money, because the cost component can run you anywhere from, $150,000, and so you're taking out pretty substantial loans. Even with some of the financial stuff that can help you out, you're still talking about a significant amount of money to attend law school. So none of that is cheap, unfortunately. So that's just something that you have to pay attention to. There are different programs that are available, either in terms of loan forgiveness, scholarships, other types of things, grants and loans and stuff like that can help you through, but it is going to be expensive.
But hey, you get the fruits of the labor later.
For sure.
Have you ever had an incident where someone committed perjury? How exactly do you win cases with a lack of evidence and based solely on a person's word?
Excellent question. So yes, have I had people commit perjury in trial? Absolutely. But I will tell you that proving perjury is actually very difficult to do. And it's not something that's oftentimes pursued, at least in state prosecutions. In federal prosecutions, a little different. They go after perjury much more substantially than we do. But it's not uncommon to have people lie. Sometimes it's your victim that's lying. In domestic violence cases, I've had victims lie a lot because they don't want to see the person that we're prosecuting actually be prosecuted. And I had a situation involving one witness who went so far to say the person that had beat her up is in fact not the person that beat her up. In fact, a completely different person that she happened to meet at a bar for which she didn't have a phone number for, showed up at this location, which she never told him about, picked her up, beat her up, brought her back. And she was so embarrassed when her boyfriend came into the room that she climbed out the window, and all these people fleeing her, saw her fleeing from this bedroom windows, was her fleeing from her boyfriend from embarrassment and not because he had basically pummeled her and left her face completely bloody and swollen. So there are different people that lie for different reasons. And sometimes, it's because they're trying to help out whoever it was. But yeah, it's your job as a lawyer or as a prosecutor or even for a defense attorney to try and get them or to show how it is that they're lying. So yeah, that does happen. When it comes to, trying to prove a case with one witness, well, the thing that I always remind jurors of is this. Do you think someone who's committing a crime wants a whole bunch of witnesses around? No. That's not usually the way they want to do it. They're not advertising or broadcasting to the world, hey, I'm committing a crime, right? So they're trying to conceal that particular crime. So you're oftentimes looking for evidence that corroborates that they were there. So cell phone records, that little device that you and I carry around all day long, has a lot of data, including telling you where exactly you were and who you've been communicating with. And law enforcement can get into your phones these days and get a lot of data. Your cell phone carrier can provide a lot of location data. So there's ways of establishing how somebody is there that goes beyond simply a witness's statement. You have DNA evidence. So having some knowledge of science is helpful in this particular area, because whether it's DNA or fingerprints or some other type of evidence that puts someone at a scene, that's stuff that oftentimes helps. And then sometimes it's really just listening to the witness, because anybody, when it comes to certain crimes such as rape, when it comes to someone getting attacked in a quite secluded area, molest cases that happen, it really ultimately turns on the testimony of one person. And does that person also deserve a chance in court to tell their story, and for 12 people to decide, is there enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this particular person committed the crime? And sometimes you got to put those cases on and see where the cards fall and see whether or not you're able to convince a jury and they're able to find that there is sufficient evidence to get to that particular point. There may not be a lot of corroboration oftentimes, but there may be just enough to get you there. And in those cases, it really comes down to the small details about who's telling the truth and who's telling a lie. And one of my favorite cases was so random. It was just something that I happened to just look up really quickly. Was the defendant had the story that was based around receiving an envelope at an address. And he's like, no, 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 I got this envelope. And he brought the envelope into court. The problem was that that address didn't exist. So his story that I received this is not possible, because if you have an address that doesn't exist, the post office can't deliver that letter in the way that you're saying. You couldn't have gotten it. So it was a very small little detail that was able to show that he was lying. But it's those types of things that you kind of have to just dig and look and whatever. And sometimes the cops miss it. It's your job as a lawyer to do your work and to find those details and to use them in your case.
Awesome, awesome. All right, at this time, I'll ask you to share your screen to show the checkout code. And then I have one final question. It's like 3 students kind of had the same one. So that'll be the last hurrah question.
Okay.
All right, students, so just make sure you get this little checkout code right here. That'll be for attending the session. We'll have one more question after this, and 3 students had the same one, so it's a good one, so stick around. But yeah, go ahead, QR this, QR shot this, or use the link and put that in the address bar. Make sure you get in for that raffle, you know. But yeah, for the last question, Mr. Yu, they had a question about work-life balance. Is being a prosecutor the most stressful job in law? And when would you say you have any free time?
Oh, wow. Good question. It is, I will say yes, it has been the most stressful job I have had in law, but I will say that it is not always stressful. So where it tends to get stressful is when you're in trial. And it really is about figuring out how to manage stress. But it's no different than, you know, when you're preparing for a huge presentation and you're working on a project that you've been working on all semester long, and you're going to do this presentation, and let's say a big chunk of your grade depends on this presentation. That's the level of stress we're talking about. I mean, the stakes are raised because of you're dealing with other people's lives and whatnot, but you know, it's that type of a thing where you're getting ready for something and you're working on something really hard and you're getting ready and all this stress around that one thing. But once that thing is done, the stress kind of goes away and you're kind of back to just kind of the normal routine. I would say that in terms of work, this job is actually more rewarding from a time standpoint and a better work-life balance than what I had before, which is when I was working in civil. Because in that realm, you're really having to clock every minute and justify everything that you're doing every moment of the day. You're sitting there and keeping track of all that type of stuff and making sure that you're generating income for your firm or for yourself if you're running your own law firm. The best part about being a DA is I don't have to watch the clock. Like, I get my work done when I get my work done. And oftentimes the day revolves around what's happening in court. And so you get to leave work at a set time. You get to start off your day. There are days where you work a little bit more. There's days that you work a little bit less. But that's the nice thing about my particular job is there's more of a balance in this particular job than I had in some of my prior legal jobs. And so, yeah, I do have free time. I do some crazy things with my free time that end up filling up my time. But I'm able to have time with my family. I'm able to do things in the community. And so that's kind of what I try to do is try to have that work-life balance. And one of the other reasons why it's very, very important to have that is because as a prosecutor, or even if you go into the criminal defense side of things, one of your responsibilities is to be able to connect with real ordinary people. And if you aren't able to live a regular ordinary life, you're going to have a hard time talking to people about regular ordinary things that happen, like going to the store, or going to the movies, or watching, a sporting event, or attending your kids' school play or something like that. If you're not able to carry on those conversations and relate to them real life things, you're going to have a hard time connecting to them as a prosecutor and be able to convince them of your case and who you are. And a lot of that comes into play. I mean, it's really about common sense at the end of the day. And if you haven't lived a life that has experiences and allowed you to figure that out, it's going to make it harder for you to do your job. So it's very important to actually have a life. And so that's actually one of the nice things about my job is I find that I do have a much better work-life balance in this particular job and some of the things that I've done before as lawyers, and what even some of the people that I know that are lawyers doing other types of work, you know, they're working a lot harder than I am. And their stress levels are much higher in different ways than mine. And like I said, mine tends to be concentrated in, you know, around trials or around major hearings that I'm doing. But then after that, you know, it's a very different environment, and it's very cordial, even though we're in an environment where we're opposing other people, but you get to know them. And so it's like you see the same people over and over and over again. You develop these relationships where you ask them, hey, how's your mom doing? How are your kids doing? You know, I hear so-and-so just graduated from school, congratulations, or, you know, your child just got married or whatever. And so these are relationships that carry you through, and it's a great working environment from that standpoint. It's a great question.
Wow. Thank you so much for being so thorough in all of your answers. It's really great opportunity here. So hopefully by now, everybody, this was a great presentation. Want to thank Mr. Yu for joining us for the Pursue Your Passion Career Talk. And I know I certainly learned a lot. I know they did too. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have a phenomenal rest of your year and all that. So cool.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Thank you so much. Everyone's saying thank you in the chat. So awesome.
All right.
Alrighty, I want to go ahead and end the meeting now, guys. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.